The hall was full of females, and Una was the only one nobody looked at twice. She stood in the third row, between two other females from her district. They were young and their carapaces were smooth and dark, the way the elders always described as beautiful. Their lineage marks were clean and high. Their posture was perfect. Una stood between them like a cracked tile in an otherwise clean floor. Her carapace had a long, pale split running from her left shoulder down to the middle of her back. It had been there since she was 12 years old. That was the year the mine collapsed. That was the year her father stopped coming home. The crack never healed the way it should have. It stayed, pale and wide, like a mark the world had pressed into her and refused to take back. She had learned over time not to think about it too much. She had learned to stand straight and keep her eyes forward. She had learned that thinking about it only made the hours feel longer. And there were many long hours in a bonding assembly. The hall on Vale Prime was large and old. The ceilings were high and carved with the old symbols of the Velhari Consortium, a language of status and rank that most younger Velhari could not fully read anymore, though they would never admit it. The floor was polished to a shine. The air smelled of the ceremonial oils that the elders burned at the entrances, sweet and heavy and slightly suffocating. The males walked in a slow line along the front of the hall. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. They moved from left to right, looking at the females in each row. And when one of them stopped in front of a female and extended his right hand, that was the beginning of a bonding declaration. The female could accept or refuse, in theory. In practice, refusing was its own kind of social mark, one that most females chose not to carry. Una watched the line of males move and told herself she was not nervous. She was not entirely convincing. The first male passed her without slowing. The second glanced at her carapace and looked away. The third did not look at her at all. She counted them silently as they went by, the way she used to count steps on the way to school when she was a child, when counting helped her feel like she had some control over the distance. Then Elder Keth came. He was not in the line of males looking for a bonding. He was one of the senior elders of the consortium. And he moved through the hall the way important people always moved, slowly, with the full expectation that everyone else would adjust around him. He was old and his carapace was very dark and polished, and he wore the red lineage marks of the highest caste on his chest. He stopped in front of Una. She did not move. She kept her eyes forward and her hands still at her sides. He looked at her the way a person looks at an object they are considering buying but do not truly want. He looked at the crack in her carapace. He looked at her lineage marks, which were low and pale. He said nothing. He simply stood there for a moment, then made a small sound in his throat. Not cruel, not kind, just empty, and moved on. The murmur moved through the hall like a wave, not loud, not sharp, not just a quiet ripple of awareness that passed between the females and the watching families along the walls. Everyone had seen, everyone understood what that small sound meant. Una kept her eyes forward. Her sister Rin was standing near the far wall with their mother. Una did not look at her. She knew that if she looked at Rin, Rin would be crying quietly, and if she saw that, something inside her chest would crack the same way her carapace had cracked, and she did not want that to happen here. Not in this hall, not in front of Elder Keth and his red lineage marks and his empty sound. So she kept her eyes forward. She counted the carved symbols on the ceiling. She breathed slowly. The assembly ended 2 hours later. No male had stopped in front of her. This was not surprising. It was the third assembly she had attended, and the result had been the same each time. Afterward, outside in the pale yellow evening light of Vale Prime, Rin found her and took her hand and held it tightly. She did not say anything. Rin was young, and she always wanted to say something that would help, but she was also smart enough to know that there was nothing useful to say. So she just held on. Their mother walked ahead of them toward the transit platform, her back very straight, her steps very precise. She did not look back. That night, Una sat at her small desk in the apartment they shared and looked at a message she had received 3 weeks ago and had not answered. It was from the Galactic Accord diplomatic office. They were offering her a posting, Accord Station Theta, a joint hub orbiting a neutral planet far outside Velhari space. 2 years, full diplomatic credentials. She would be the only Velhari delegate at the station during the posting period, which meant full autonomy over her decisions and reports. She had not answered it because 2 years was a long time, and leaving Vale Prime meant leaving Rin and her mother, and she had told herself that she wanted to think carefully before deciding. She had told herself that a good diplomat always considered all angles before acting. Those were the things she had told herself. Now she sat in the quiet of the apartment, with the sounds of the city coming softly through the window, and the memory of Elder Keth's empty sound still sitting in her chest like a stone, and she opened the message. She read it again. She thought about the 2 years. She thought about the autonomy. She thought about the word delegate, which meant she would be expected to speak, on and speak often, and that her speaking would matter. She wrote her acceptance. She kept it short and formal, the way diplomatic correspondence was supposed to be. She did not write it quickly. She wrote it carefully, the way she did everything. And when she was done, she read it once more, made one small correction, and sent it. Then she closed her desk screen and sat in the dark for a little while. She told herself she was not running away from Vale Prime. She was moving toward something. She told herself there was a difference. She was almost certain she was right. Outside, the city of Vale Prime hummed its usual evening sounds. Transit lines, vendor calls, the distant echo of public announcements. It was all familiar. It was all the same. And in the morning, for the first time in a long time, Una began to pack. My Accord Station Theta smelled like recycled air and old metal, and about 40 different kinds of food cooking at the same time. Una noticed this the moment she stepped off the transit shuttle and into the main concourse. The smell was not bad exactly. It was just large, layered and complicated the way a crowded place always was. She stood still for a moment with her travel case at her side and let the concourse move around her. Different species walked past in every direction. She recognized most of them from her diplomatic training files. Cathali, Drenali, Soon, 2 or 3 she could not immediately place. A pair of humans in station uniforms walked by talking quickly to each other, not looking at anything in particular. The way people walked when they had somewhere to be and had long stopped noticing where they were. She adjusted her travel case and followed the signs to the diplomatic wing. Her quarters were small and clean. The walls were the gray-white color of most Accord Station interiors. Neutral, chosen deliberately so that no species would feel like the space belonged to another. There was a narrow window that looked out at the planet below, which was pale blue and cloud-covered and beautiful in a quiet, indifferent way. She set her case on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a while. Then she stood up because sitting and looking at things was not useful, and she unpacked. The first 2 days were orientation. She met the station's administrative staff, reviewed the diplomatic protocols for neutral space operations, and attended a welcome briefing run by Commander Voss, a broad, gray-haired human with a blunt way of speaking and eyes that seemed to be calculating something at all times. He shook her hand firmly, which she knew was a human greeting custom, and told her his door was open if she had questions. She thanked him and meant it. She met Ambassador Hara on the second day briefly in a corridor. Hara was Velhari, older than Una, with dark, unblemished carapace and high lineage marks. She looked Una over once in the way Velhari females looked each other over, quick and complete, and then nodded with what seemed like genuine respect. That surprised Una slightly. She filed it away to think about later. On the third day, she found the cafeteria. It was not the main cafeteria on the upper level, which was large and always full and loud with a dozen languages running over each other. This was a smaller one, 2 levels down near the logistics and maintenance sections of the station. It had fewer tables, older chairs, and a service counter that offered only a limited selection. Most of the diplomatic staff did not come here. She had come because she had been walking and thinking and not paying attention to which direction she was going, and she had looked up and found herself at the entrance. The light inside was dim and warm and quiet. There was one other person in the cafeteria. He was sitting at a table near the window. He was a human male, not young, not old, somewhere in the middle of a life. He had short hair that was going gray at the sides and a face that looked like it had been through more weather than was comfortable. He was wearing plain clothes, not a uniform, and when he had a cup of something dark in front of him and a physical book open flat on the table. He was reading. He did not look up when she came in. She went to the service counter and ordered something warm, then found a table at the opposite end of the room. She sat. She looked at her reports. She ate slowly. Halfway through the meal, the man turned a page. That was the only sound he made the entire time she was there. When she left, he did not look up. She came back the next day at the same hour. He was there again. Same table. Different book. Or possibly the same one. She could not tell. He did not look up then either. They did not speak for several days. She began to learn his outline from other people the way you learn things about a place, in pieces, from different sources, without asking directly. His name was Dai. He had served in the Outer Rim War, which had been long and costly and had ended 3 years ago with an agreement that left nobody entirely satisfied. He had been decorated several times. When the war ended and his unit disbanded, he had not gone home to Earth. He had taken a logistics contract on Accord Station Theta instead. He managed supply routing, incoming cargo, outgoing shipments, repair parts, the quiet mechanical life of the station. Commander Voss, who had served in the same war, was asked about it sometimes. Why had Dee stayed? Voss always answered the same way, in the same flat voice. He stopped having somewhere to be, and then he changed the subject. Una thought about that answer more than she expected to. She began to watch Day the way she watched everything, carefully from a reasonable distance, and knew without drawing attention to the watching. It was a skill she had developed a long time ago. On Vale Prime, being too visible had always come with a cost. Watching quietly was safer. She noticed things. He said good morning to the cleaning staff by name. He did not say it loudly or with performance. He just said it, the way you said something you meant. When the service counter ran out of the item he had ordered, he looked at the menu for 2 seconds and picked something else and did not make any expression about it at all. When a young Cathali who worked in the lower maintenance section dropped an entire tray of food near the entrance one morning, cups and plates and everything clattering loud across the floor, while the Cathali stood frozen in the middle of it. Today looking like they wanted the floor to open, Day got up from his table without a word, picked up the tray, and helped collect the pieces. He did not say anything that would make the moment into a thing. He just helped, and then he went back to his table and his book. Una watched that and did not say anything either. She thought about it later in her quarters, sitting at her desk with the planet turning slowly outside her window. She thought about the way some people made the space around them easier to be in without without making you feel like you owed them anything for it. She had not been around many people like that. She did not have a word for what she was noticing. She was a diplomat and she had many words for many things, but this one did not fit neatly into any category she had. She wrote in her notes that evening, not her official reports, but her private ones, the ones she kept in a locked file. 3 words, he is quiet. Then she closed the file, turned off her desk screen, and went to sleep. In the morning, she went back to the small cafeteria at the same hour. He was there. His cup was dark and full. His book was open. She got her food. She sat at her table. She looked at her reports. The cafeteria was quiet and warm and dim, and the station hummed softly all around them. And for the first time since leaving Bell Prime, Una did not feel entirely alone in a room. She did not examine that feeling too closely, but she did not push it away either. It started with a broken data packet and 36 hours on a clock that nobody had asked to start. Una found out about the problem at 0600 station time, when she opened her morning reports and found an urgent flag from the Velhari Consortium's communication relay. A critical diplomatic file, the full documentation packet for the Velhari trade ratification ceremony, had been corrupted in transit. The packet had passed through 3 relay points on its way to Accord Station Theta, and somewhere in the middle of the second relay, something had gone wrong. The file had arrived, but large sections of it were broken, unreadable, the kind of corrupted that looked simple on the surface and was usually not. The ratification ceremony was scheduled in 36 hours. Without the full documentation packet, the ceremony could not legally proceed. 3 other species had already sent their delegates. The logistics were already in motion. If the ceremony collapsed, it would not just be an embarrassment, it would set back 6 months of careful negotiation and give the opposing bloc in the consortium exactly the argument they had been waiting for. Una sat at her desk and looked at the broken file and felt the familiar cold weight of a problem with no easy answer. She went through the options quickly. The way her training had taught her, she could request a retransmission from Vel Prime. But the next available relay window was 22 hours away, and the transfer itself would take 8 more after that. Too late. She could attempt a partial reconstruction using the readable sections, but she was a diplomat, not a data technician, and the technical depth of what was broken went well beyond her skills. She could request help from the station's technical department. She looked up who ran the station's technical communication systems. The name in the file was Day. She sat with that for a moment. Then she closed the file, stood up, and went to find him. He was in the logistics bay on the lower level, standing at a long table covered in routing manifests and talking to a soon worker about a delayed cargo shipment. He looked up when she came in. He did not look surprised to see her, but he did not look like he had been expecting her either. He just looked. She explained the problem directly because there was no time not to. She told him what was broken, what the deadline was, what the stakes were. She asked if he could help. He was quiet for a moment, not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, the kind where someone was actually thinking instead of just preparing what to say. Then he told the soon worker they would finish the manifest later, picked up a small kit from the shelf behind him, and said, "Show me." They worked in the smaller communication room off the diplomatic wing. It was a narrow room with good screens and very little else. Just 2 chairs, the terminal, and the broken file spread across 3 monitors in a pattern of green, readable sections and gray corrupted gaps. Dai looked at it for about 4 minutes without saying anything. Una stood to the side and let him look. She had learned in her years of diplomatic work that watching how someone approached a problem told you more about them than almost anything else. He was methodical. He started at the edges of the corruption, not the center. He mapped the pattern of what was broken before he touched any of it. And he was doing what she recognized as the correct approach, understanding the shape of the problem before attempting to fix it. And he was doing it without being told. She sat down and pulled up the readable sections. "I can start here," she said. "Reconstruct the ceremonial language from the sections we have and cross-reference with the consortium's standard protocol templates." He nodded without looking up from the technical corruption. "That'll help. Do the outer sections first. They'll give me anchors." They worked. She was fast and precise with the text reconstruction. This was her area, the language, the protocol, the exact phrasing that had to match legal standards. He was slower but thorough with the technical side, pulling corrupted data apart carefully, recovering what could be recovered and flagging what could not. They moved in parallel, checking in with each other every hour to align what they had rebuilt. At the 4th hour, Una caught a mistake. She had reconstructed a section of ceremonial language using the wrong protocol template. A very close one, nearly identical but wrong for the specific trade classification involved. If she had not caught it, the file would have passed a surface check but failed a detailed legal review. She found it herself, fixed it, and said quietly, "I made an error. Fixed it now." Day looked over briefly. "Good catch," he said, and went back to his section. 2 words. She did not know why they stayed with her as long as they did. She had been told she was smart her whole life, usually by teachers and training officers, and people who then immediately found reasons to dismiss her in other ways. Smart but marked. Only capable but low caste. Impressive considering. The praise always came with its companion, the small quiet reduction that followed behind it like a shadow. Good catch. No shadow, no companion. Just the thing itself. She filed it away in the same way she filed other useful information and kept working. They finished at hour 9. The packet was not perfect. There were 3 small sections that could not be fully recovered and had to be reconstructed from template rather than original. But it was complete, legally sound, and ready. Una reviewed the final version twice and signed off on it. Then she transmitted it to the station's diplomatic records and flagged it ready for the ceremony. She leaned back in her chair. The room was very quiet. The screen still showed the green and gray pattern of the file, but the gray was almost gone now. Dee closed his kit and stretched his neck to one side, the way people did when they had been sitting still too long. "Will it hold?" she asked. The technical side will hold, he said. The language sections are yours. They'll hold, she said. He nodded once like that settled it and stood up to leave. Thank you, she said. She meant it without decoration. It was the plain version of the words. He looked at her for a moment. The ceremony going to matter? Whatever you're ratifying? She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. For 3 different species, yes. He picked up his kit. Then it was worth the night, he said, and left. She sat alone in the narrow room for a few minutes. The screens were still on. The station hummed. Outside the small porthole above the terminal, and the stars were the same as always. Constant, indifferent, and very far away. Ambassador Hera found her there 20 minutes later, reviewing the final file one more time. Hera stood in the doorway and looked at the screens and then at Una. I heard there was a problem, Hera said. There was, Una said. It's handled. Hera looked at the screens a moment longer. Then she looked at Una in that same careful, complete way she had in the corridor. I'm going to put your name in my next report, she said. I want you to know so it doesn't surprise you. Una looked up. As a problem or as a solution? The corner of Hera's mouth moved, just slightly. As someone worth watching, she said, and walked away. The ceremony went forward 31 hours later. It went well. 3 species signed. The documentation held. And that evening, Una went to the small cafeteria. She got her food. She sat at her table. Dai was there. His cup was dark. His book was open. He did not look up. But when she sat down, there was already a second cup on the table near her side. Dark and warm, the same as his. She looked at it. She looked at him. He turned a page. She picked up the cup and drank and did not say anything. Neither did he. The cafeteria was quiet and the station hummed, and something that had not existed a week ago was now, quietly and without announcement, beginning. The second cup became a habit before either of them named it as one. It was just there when she arrived. Dark and warm, placed on the table near her side without ceremony, without comment, and she drank it. And they sat in the quiet cafeteria and did their separate things. And somewhere in the middle of that routine, the weeks began to pass without Una noticing quite how many. They started talking in small amounts, the way water finds cracks. Not with the large questions first, not the way diplomats open conversations, which was carefully and with purpose, and always with some awareness of what they were building toward. It started with the small things. The station, the particular loudness of the main concourse at midday, the way the atmospheric system in the lower levels made the air feel thicker than it should. He mentioned something once about a shipment of calibration parts that had arrived mislabeled, and she made an observation about the routing protocol that was clearly responsible, and he looked at her with something that was not quite surprise but was close to it. Amber, you read the logistics manifest? He asked. I read everything available, she said. It helps to understand how the station actually works. He considered that for a moment. Then he nodded once, in the way he nodded when something made sense to him. Not enthusiastically, just honestly. That's smart, he said, and went back to his food. That was how it went for a while. Small pieces, honest ones. Then gradually the conversations got longer. He asked about her work, not the polite version, not the social question that expected a short answer and a change of subject. He asked like someone who actually wanted to know. What did a Velhari diplomatic delegate do on a neutral station? What were the particular difficulties of negotiating when you were the only delegate from your species present? She found herself answering in more detail than she usually gave, because he kept asking the next question, and the one after that, and the questions were always about the actual content of the work, not about her. She asked about the war. She was careful with it at first, approaching from the edges, the way he had approached the corrupted file, mapping the shape before touching the center. He answered in the same direct way he answered most things, without making the answers larger or smaller than they needed to be. He told her about the outer rim, about the length of it, about the specific kind of tired that came from a conflict that went on long enough for everyone involved to forget what winning was supposed to look like. Were you afraid? She asked one evening. It was later than their usual hour. The cafeteria was completely empty except for them. He thought about it. Yes, he said, mostly of making mistakes that cost other people. She understood that. She did not say so, but she did. One evening she told him about her father. She had not planned to. They had been talking about the mining industry on Vale Prime. She was explaining a trade clause she was preparing, and the words simply arrived. She told him about the mine, about the year she was 12, about the way the news had come and how her mother had gone very still and how Rin had been too young to understand and had kept asking when he was coming home for 3 days before someone finally sat with her and explained. And then she said, without meaning to, the crack in my carapace happened in the same accident. The structural shock. I was in the lower district when it happened. She stopped. She had not said that plainly to anyone before. She had given the fact when required, in the flat tone of medical history. She had not given the connection. People always see the carapace first, she said. They see the defect. They don't see that it and the loss of my father are the same event. Day was quiet. He did not say he was sorry in the immediate, reflex way. He let the words settle first. Then he said, that's a hard thing to carry around while people miss the point. She looked at him. They see a flaw, he said. You're carrying a memory of your father. Those are very different things, and the people around you have apparently never figured that out. She did not say anything for a moment. She had spent many years being precise with language, and she found, iffy in that moment, that she did not have a precise response. So she just stayed with the words and let them be what they were. She told him about the bonding assemblies. She told it the way she told difficult truths in diplomatic settings, calmly with the facts in order, without asking for a particular reaction. She described the third row, the line of males, the ones who passed without slowing, Elder Keth and his pause and his empty sound. When she finished, Day was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Keth sounds like an idiot. It was so simple, so flat and sure, not performed, not elaborate, just a plain assessment delivered like the conclusion of an obvious equation. She laughed. It startled both of them, her more than him. She was not a person who laughed easily or often. And the sound came out of her before she could arrange her face into something more composed. And for a moment she felt the old habit move in her, the one that said smaller, quieter, less. And then it passed, and she just let herself finish laughing. He was watching her with something warm in his face, not triumph, not the look of someone who had done a thing on purpose and was pleased with the result. Just something easy and real. You should do that more, he said. Laugh at cruel elders, she said. Laugh, he said. She looked down at her cup. I'll consider it, she said. Commander Voss, who had known Day for 14 years, noticed the change sometime in the third month. He could not have named exactly what it was at first. Day did not become louder or more social. He did not change his habits in any obvious way. But there was something different in the quality of his stillness. It was less like a man who had run out of motion and more like a man who had found a place to stop voluntarily. Voss had spent enough years watching soldiers come back from long fights to know the difference. He did not say anything to Day about it. He just watched and was quietly glad. Ambassador Hara watched too, but with a different kind of attention. She was older and had spent many years studying how species navigated each other, and she recognized what was forming between Yuna and the human in the lower cafeteria as something that had no precise diplomatic category. It was not alliance. It was not negotiation. It was the quieter and rarer thing. Two people finding, without quite intending to, that they made more sense in the other's presence than outside of it. Among the Velhari staff on the station, there were whispers. Some of them were scandalized in the old-fashioned way, the way people were scandalized by things that interrupted their categories. Some of them were genuinely curious. One young Velhari administrative worker asked Hara directly what she thought about it. Hara said, I think it's none of our business. And the young worker understood that this was not dismissal, but instruction. Yuna was aware of the whispers. She had been aware of whispers about herself her whole life. She had long ago learned to let them pass through her like weather. Present, sometimes uncomfortable, ultimately not something she could control. What she could control was herself. And what she found sitting in the dim cafeteria with two dark cups on the table and the station humming around them, why was that she did not want to control this particular thing. She wanted instead to simply let it continue being what it was. honest and warm and quiet and entirely remarkably uncomplicated. She did not have a word for it yet, but she was a diplomat. She would find one, eventually. For now, she picked up her cup, and she stayed. Elder Keth arrived on Accord Station Theta on a Tuesday, which was an ordinary day right up until the moment it wasn't. He came as part of a Velhari Consortium delegation, 3 senior diplomats and their staff, traveling to participate in a regional trade review. It was a routine visit. It had been on the station's schedule for 2 months. Una had seen it in her briefing files and noted it the way she noted all routine items, with professional attention and no personal feeling. She told herself that when she read it. She was almost certain she believed it. The delegation arrived at the main docking bay in the late morning. Una was not present for the arrival. She was not required to be. But she received the formal notice and sent the appropriate diplomatic acknowledgement. Professional, clean, correct. She went back to her work. She heard about the statement 4 hours later. Keth had made it in the station's diplomatic reception hall during the welcoming gathering for the delegation. It was a semi-public space, not restricted, not off-record. He had been speaking to 2 senior consortium officials when he said it, but the hall was not empty and voices carried. What he said was that Accord Station Theta had been an embarrassment to the Velhari Consortium by giving a posting to a delegate who was, in his phrasing, not a representative example of Velhari capability or standing. He did not use Una's name. He did not need to. Everyone in the hall who knew the station knew who the only Velhari delegate was. He also said, and this was the part that moved quickly through the station, that out of a sense of Velhari communal responsibility, he was prepared to offer Una a conditional bonding contract, the kind of offer that was made, in Velhari culture, to females who had no other prospects, widows, outcasts, females who needed to be managed rather than chosen. He framed it as generosity. Una heard all of this from Ambassador Hara, who came to her office and delivered it with the precise, controlled tone of a person who was very angry, but was not going to let the anger be the most important thing in the room. Una listened, and she did not move. She kept her hands flat on the desk. When Hara finished, the room was quiet for a moment. He said it in the reception hall, Una said, not a question. In front of 11 people, Hara said. It will be 14 by dinner. Una understood what that meant. On Accord Station Theta, 14 people at dinner was a public statement. By morning, it would have moved through the diplomatic community, the administrative staff, the logistics wing. It would have structure and weight, and Keth's conditional offer, once spoken publicly, carried legal implications under Velhari Consortium law. She had a window in which to respond, or the offer would be entered into the record as a standing declaration. It was a trap, a neat, old-fashioned one, honors built from the assumption that she had no one to speak on her behalf and nowhere to stand. Hera looked at her carefully. What do you want to do? Una looked at her desk, at the reports she had been writing before Hara came in, at the window and the blue planet turning slowly outside it. I need to think, she said. Hera left. Una sat alone and thought. She thought about the reception hall and about Keth's voice and about the particular cruelty of being someone's charity project announced in front of witnesses. She thought about the window in which she had to respond. She thought about Velhari law and Accord Station statutes and the very precise intersection of the two. She was a diplomat. Thinking was what she did. Then she stood up because sitting still was no longer useful, and she went to find Day. He was in the logistics bay. She walked in, and he took one look at her face. Not a long look, just a brief one, and told the 2 workers at the far table that they could take their break early. They left without complaint. He turned back to her. She told him what had happened. All of it. Keth's statement, the conditional offer, the legal implications. She told it cleanly, the way she always told difficult things, and she watched his face as she spoke. He did not perform a reaction. He listened, and his face was still, and she could see him doing what he always did when presented with a problem, understanding the shape of it before he touched anything. When she finished, he said, "What does Velhari law say about a conditional bonding declaration made in neutral space?" She looked at him. Under the consortium's own treaty terms, a declaration made in neutral space is governed by Accord Station statutes, not exclusively by consortium law. Which means, she stopped. He was watching her. Which means it can be contested by any registered sentient, she said slowly. Not just a Velhari male. The Accord Neutrality Clause specifically. She stopped again. The thought was arriving in pieces, each one clicking into the next with the particular feeling of something legal and precise falling into place. He made it publicly, on record, in the reception hall. Which means it's a public declaration, Day said. Which means it can receive a public counter-declaration, she said, under Article 14 of the Accord Neutrality Statutes. Any registered sentient, not restricted by species. The room was very quiet. She looked at him. And he looked back at her with the same expression he had had the night they fixed the data packet. Focused, calm, already somewhere ahead of the moment. I want to ask you something, he said, and I need you to understand that the answer doesn't change anything between us. Whatever you say, that stays the same. Ask, she said. He asked. She stood there in the logistics bay and listened to him, and she thought about Elder Keth and his red lineage marks and his empty sound and his charitable offer delivered in front of 11 people. She thought about all the bonding assemblies, all the males who had passed without slowing, all the mornings she had told herself she was moving towards something rather than away. Let me think about this properly, she said. Don't do anything yet. Let me verify the statute. Fair, he said. And she went back to her office and pulled up Article 14. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she drafted a legal summary and sent it to Ambassador Hara with one question. Is my reading of this correct? Hera's response came back in 20 minutes. It said, yes, and I already checked it twice before you asked. Una sat back in her chair. She looked at her desk, at the reports, at the window. She picked up her communication line and called D. My reading was correct, she said when he answered. There was a brief pause on the line. Hora's been very quiet this afternoon, he said. That usually means she's doing something she finds satisfying. She verified it for me, Una said. She also said she had already checked it twice. Another pause. So, he said, what do you want to do? The question was exactly right. Not what Keth had done to her, not what the law allowed, not what would be politically useful, what she wanted to do. He asked it the same way he asked all his questions. Like her answer was the most important piece of information in the room. She thought about it for 3 more seconds. She was a diplomat. 3 seconds was a long time when she was thinking clearly. Do it properly, she said. Have Hera check every line. I don't want a single procedural error. Understood, he said. Day, she said. Yes. Don't do it for me, she said. I need to know you're doing it because you want to. A pause, not hesitation. The real kind of quiet. I know the difference, he said. So do you. She did. She let out a breath. File it on the public record, she said. Don't do it quietly. I wasn't planning to, he said. She set down the line and looked at the window, and the blue planet and the stars. And something in her chest that had been sitting very still for a very long time shifted. Not loudly, not with drama, just moved, a fraction, like a door that had been closed for years and was opening, finally from the inside. Across the station, in the logistics wing, Day called Hara. On the other end, Hara listened. Then she said, I'll bring the documents to you. I've had them ready for 40 minutes. He was not surprised. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. File it right. I will, he said, and he did. The next morning, Accord Station Theta's public diplomatic record showed a formal counter-declaration of bonding intent, filed correctly under Article 14 of the Accord Neutrality Statutes, with all required documentation, reviewed and verified by Ambassador Hera, and entered by one Day, registered civilian contractor, human. The station did not erupt all at once. It moved in waves, first the diplomatic wing, then administrative, then logistics, then the main concourse. By midday, every species on the station had heard some version of it. Elder Keth, in his guest quarters, heard it shortly after breakfast. His aide brought him the filing. He read it twice. He did not say anything for a long time. Outside, Accord Station Theta hummed and turned and went about its business. And in the small cafeteria on the lower level, 2 cups sat on a corner table, still warm, waiting. The station had an opinion about everything for 3 days. In the main concourse, the filing was discussed in at least 6 languages. In the diplomatic wing, it generated 2 formal inquiries, one strongly worded letter from a consortium-aligned officer, and a notably long silence from Ambassador Hara that everyone who worked near her understood to be a form of satisfaction. In the logistics section, Day's co-workers said nothing directly to him, but treated him with a slightly increased level of respect that he did not ask for and did not acknowledge. Una moved through all of it the way she had learned to move through difficult spaces, quietly with her head up, her pace steady, her expression giving away nothing that she had not decided to give. She answered the 2 formal inquiries with crisp, accurate documentation. She did not respond to the letter. She attended her scheduled meetings and did her work, and in the evenings she returned to her quarters and sat with the blue planet outside her window and thought. She was giving herself a week. She had said so. Day had said that was fine. He had not followed it with anything. No reassurance, no pressure, no check-in the next morning to see how she was progressing. He had said it was fine and meant it, and since then he had simply continued being exactly who he was, in the cafeteria at the usual hour with 2 cups on the table. She noticed that too. The not pushing? It was harder to carry, in some ways, than pressure would have been. Pressure she knew how to respond to. The absence of it left her alone with only her own thinking, which was where the honest answers lived. She thought carefully. She had spent her whole professional life believing that careful thought was the correct response to everything. That if you mapped something from enough angles, you would find the right path through it. So she mapped. She thought about what accepting would mean, practically. 2 people from different species, different cultures, different biological structures, formalizing a bond in a legal framework that neither of their cultures had designed with this in mind. The complexity was real. She did not reduce it or pretend it away. There would be things to navigate that had no established protocol. There would be moments where the absence of a clear map would be uncomfortable. She thought about what refusing would mean. The counter-declaration was on record regardless. That was already done. And Keth's offer was already tangled in legal complication because of it. She was free either way, exactly as Day had said. Refusal would not undo anything bad. It would simply be a choice, made for its own reasons. So she turned the question around, the way you turned a broken file to find where the corruption began. She asked herself not what are the complications of accepting, but what is the honest reason to refuse? She sat with that question for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she walked to the small cafeteria at the usual hour. He was there. 2 cups. Book open. He looked up when she came in, and she saw in his face that he was not reading her arrival for a sign. He was just looking, the way he always looked, steady and without agenda. She sat down across from him. She picked up her cup. She drank. Then she said, I want to ask you something. Go ahead, he said. Why? She said. The real reason. He closed his book. He thought about it, not for effect, but actually thought, looking at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. You're the most interesting person I've met in years, he said. That's the foundation of it. You're smart and you're honest, and you do your work like it matters, which it does, and you don't ask for anything you haven't earned. He paused. And I've been looking for a reason to say so for a few months now, and Keth accidentally handed me the legal mechanism to do it. A brief pause. I'm also aware that last part sounds strange. It doesn't, she said. Good, he said. You didn't do it to help me, she said. It was not quite a question. I did it because I wanted to, he said. If it helped you, I'm glad. But the wanting was mine. She looked at him. He looked back, the same way he always looked, with patience and without edges. I also want to be clear, he said, that you don't have to accept. What I filed is on the record regardless, which deals with Keth's offer. You're free either way. I mean that exactly. I know you mean it, she said. Okay, he said. She set down her cup. She had spent the week mapping the question, and now she had the answer. And the answer was simple enough that she felt slightly embarrassed by the complexity she had wrapped around it. She did not want to refuse. She had looked for an honest reason to refuse, and she had not found one. What she had found underneath all the mapping and the careful angles was something that felt like wanting, quiet and persistent and entirely her own. And it had been there for a while. She had just not been looking directly at it. "I have a condition," she said. He waited. "I won't be a quiet thing in a corner," she said. "I have work to do. I have opinions on most things, and I intend to express them. I have a career, and I'm going to keep it. Whatever this is, it doesn't change any of that." He looked at her like she had said something obvious. "I know that," he said. "I need to say it plainly," she said. "I know," he said. "And I heard it. And I've been sitting across from you for months watching you be exactly that person. And that's—" He paused, and she thought for a moment he was going to stop there. But he didn't. "That's the part I like best." The cafeteria was quiet around them. The station hummed. Somewhere outside the porthole, the planet was doing its usual slow turning, when indifferent and beautiful. Una looked at her cup. She looked at him. She thought about all the long hours and all the bonding assemblies, standing in the third row, with her hands still at her sides and her eyes forward. She thought about Elder Keth's empty sound. She thought about Good Catch and 2 cups, and a human who got up and helped without making it into something you owed him. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right?" "Yes," she said. Something moved through his face. Not a large thing, not dramatic. Just something warm settling, the way a room became a different kind of quiet when the right thing was finally said. He nodded once and picked up his book, and the cafeteria went on being still. But Una's hands, she noticed, were relaxed on the table. They had not been relaxed in a very long time. When Ambassador Hara received the formal acceptance filing the next morning, she read it at her desk, set it down, and sat very still for a moment. Then she reached across her desk and pressed the small notification for her assistant. "Clear my afternoon," she said. "Is something wrong?" her assistant asked. "No," she said. "I just want a quiet afternoon." She got it. She spent it reviewing the legal documentation she had helped prepare, checking it one more time for completeness, and then she filed it into the station's official record with a small note in the administrative log that said only, "Properly executed. No outstanding objections on procedural grounds." Commander Voss found out the same day. He was in his office when the notification came through his terminal. He read it. He read it again. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for about 30 seconds. Then he got up, walked to the small cabinet in the corner of his office, opened it, and took out a bottle of something he had been saving for over a year. He poured a small amount into a cup. He stood at his window and looked at the stars. "About time," he said to nobody in particular. And on Vale Prime, at a station relay terminal in the diplomatic quarter, Rin received a message from her sister. It was short, as most of Yuna's messages were. It said what had happened, plainly and in order, and at the end it said, "I need you to know I am not running away from something. I am staying towards something. There is a difference, and this time I am entirely certain I am right." Rin read it 3 times. And then she put her face in her hands and made a sound that was half crying and half laughing, and after a while it became entirely laughing, and she stayed there for several minutes, alone in the quiet relay room on Vale Prime, laughing at the stars. Back on Accord Station Theta, in the small cafeteria on the lower level, 2 cups sat on the corner table. Both warm, both full, and Una sat across from Day, and they were quiet in the way that people were quiet when everything necessary had been said, and what remained was simply being in the same place. And that was enough, and more than enough, and exactly right. It was held on the observation deck of Accord Station Theta, on a Saturday afternoon when the planet below was turned toward its sun, and the light came through the wide viewport at the angle that made the whole deck feel warmer than it was. Commander Voss presided over it, which was his legal right as the station's ranking officer, and he did it with the particular dignity of a man who took serious things seriously and had no patience for anything that would reduce this to something smaller than it was. There were 8 people present. Ambassador Hara stood near the front, straight-backed and still, wearing the formal Velhari sash that indicated she was present as an official witness. 2 of Day's logistics colleagues stood quietly to one side, having been invited because they were the people he worked next to every day, and he did not distinguish between small friendships and important ones. A young Cathali administrative worker who had quietly admired Yuna for months stood near the door, technically there to manage the documentation, actually there because Yuna had noticed her watching with hope for weeks and had included her without explanation. And on the wall screen behind them, in a long-range hologram from Vel Prime, was Rin. She had been on the call before anyone else arrived. She had positioned herself in the relay room with the best signal quality she could arrange and set up her screen so she could see the whole deck. When Yuna walked in, Rin made a sound that carried across 50 light years without any difficulty and pressed both hands over her mouth and cried and laughed and did both at the same time for a while and eventually composed herself enough to wave. Day wore his plain clothes. While Yuna wore the formal diplomat's wrap she had brought from Vale Prime, deep blue with the silver edging that indicated her posting rank. She had not brought it with any occasion in mind, but it was what she had, and it was the most honest version of herself she could put on, and that seemed right for the day. Voss read the formal bonding declaration in a voice that was steady and did not waver. He had practiced it twice in his office that morning and told no one, which was the kind of thing he did. When he reached the part where both parties affirmed their intent, his voice was slightly different than his usual command tone, quieter, with more weight behind it. Yuna and Day both said yes, not at the same moment, not in perfect unison. Yuna a fraction of a second before him, which was how she did most things. He looked at her when she said it, and she looked back at him, and there was nothing complicated in either of those looks. Just the plain, solid fact of two people meaning what they said. When it was done, Rin burst into full crying with no further attempt to manage it. Voss turned away from the main group and looked at the planet through the viewport for about 30 seconds before turning back. His eyes were dry, technically, but only because he had blinked carefully at the right moment, and Hara noticed this and said nothing, which was the kindest thing she could have done. Hara shook Yuna's hand afterward with both of hers, a gesture that was not Velhari custom, but was unmistakably genuine. She said, "You have done something that required more courage than most people understand." And Yuna said, "Oh, I had good help with the paperwork," and the corner of Hara's mouth moved in the way that meant she was more pleased than she would say out loud. Elder Keth filed a formal objection with the Velhari Consortium 12 days later. It was a thorough objection, carefully worded, citing multiple clauses of consortium law and structured to make the bonding appear procedurally invalid. Keth was not a stupid man, and he had good legal advisors. The objection was reviewed by the Accord Station Legal Office, cross-referenced against Article 14 and the Neutrality Statutes, and forwarded to the Galactic Accord's Arbitration Board. The Arbitration Board reviewed it for 3 weeks, which was the standard time. They compared it against every piece of documentation that had been filed. The counter-declaration, the acceptance, Sohara's verification logs, the original public statement Keth had made in the reception hall, and the station's time-stamped records showing the entire sequence of events in order. The objection was denied. The denial was written in the precise, impersonal language of legal arbitration, which said nothing about Elder Keth directly. But what it effectively said, in legal terms, was that Keth had made a public declaration in neutral space, that public declarations in neutral space were subject to Accord statutes, that the counter-declaration had followed those statutes exactly and completely, and that no procedural error of any kind had been identified. It said this in very clean official language that would be on the permanent record of the Galactic Accord for as long as the record was maintained. Keth returned to Vel Prime. When he did not make any further public statements about Yuna, he had made a very clean, legally perfect record of his own behavior, and it followed him in the way that records followed people, quietly and permanently. In the months that followed, Yuna's work changed. Not in its nature. She was still a diplomat, still in the work of negotiation and language, and the slow, careful construction of agreements between species that did not always trust each other. But her position changed. She was no longer simply a Velhari delegate on a neutral station. She was something without a clean category, and in diplomacy, being without a clean category was often where the most useful work happened. She moved between species that would not have spoken easily to each other. Her particular combination of Velahari cultural knowledge and her bond with a human veteran, someone who had been in the Outer Rim War and was known in several circles as a person whose word was reliable, gave her access to conversations that standard diplomatic channels would have struggled to open. She did not use this as a weapon. She used it as a door, walked through it carefully, and did the work on the other side. The Cathali Resource Accord took 4 months to negotiate. It was a complex agreement covering mineral rights and environmental protections in a region that 3 species had been arguing about for a decade. Una was not the only diplomat involved, but she was the one who found the precise phrasing in Article 7 that both sides could live with. The kind of thing that looked simple on the page and required an enormous amount of quiet, careful thought to arrive at. When it was signed, the senior Cathali negotiator told her it was the most elegant piece of diplomatic language he had read in 20 years. She thanked him and went back to her desk and wrote her notes and started on the next file. The Outer Rim Resettlement Treaty was harder. It involved populations displaced by the war, communities of 3 different species who had been living in temporary stations for 3 years and needed permanent arrangements. It was slow work. It was the kind of work that required sitting with difficult people in rooms where everyone was tired and nobody fully trusted anyone else, wished in finding somehow the shape of an agreement that was not perfect but was real. Una was in those rooms for 6 months. She came home from them, most evenings, tired in the specific way that came from spending a day in other people's fear and frustration, and she sat in the cafeteria with her cup, and Day sat across from her with his book, and neither of them said very much. She did not need words on those evenings. She needed the quiet and the dark cup in the presence of a person who was simply there without requiring anything from her. When the treaty was signed, she received a formal commendation from the Accord's Diplomatic Council. She read it, filed it, and went to the cafeteria. It was late. He was there. She sat down. He had already left the second cup. She told him about the commendation. He said, "Sure, that's good, Martz," and meant it, and went back to his book. She drank her cup and looked at the stars. One evening later, months after the treaty, in the particular stillness of a late hour, when the station was as quiet as it ever got, she asked him a question. She had been thinking about it for a while, and she was not sure why she had not asked it before. "Do you ever think about going home?" she said. "To Earth." He was quiet for a moment, not long. "Sometimes I think about it," he said. "The way you think about a place you knew well when you were a different version of yourself." "Does it feel like home?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked around the cafeteria, at the old tables and the dim warm light and the small porthole with its piece of space and planet. He looked at her, and I stopped having a clear idea of what home was supposed to mean for a while, and he said, "During the war, after, I knew it was supposed to be a place, but the place I had didn't quite fit anymore." He looked at the porthole again. The planet was visible, turning. "I think I'm getting a better idea now." Una looked at the planet too. She thought about Vel Prime in the 3rd row and Rin's hand in hers in the pale yellow evening light. She thought about the packed case she had carried onto the transit shuttle and the cold, uncertain feeling of the first days on the station. She thought about the small cafeteria and a second cup placed without explanation on a corner table by a man who read physical books and helped with spilled trays and said "good catch" like it cost him nothing. Whereas she thought about the crack in her carapace and her father, and how for most of her life those 2 things had been carried separately. The mark that made her lesser and the loss that she kept for herself. And how, one evening in this room, she had said them as one thing and been heard. She picked up her cup. "So do I," she said. Outside the porthole, the stars were the same as they had always been, constant and cold and very far away. The planet turned beneath them, unhurried in its long and steady orbit, and in the small cafeteria on the lower level of Accord Station Theta, the light was warm and the cups were full, and 2 people sat together in the good kind of quiet, the kind that was not empty, but was instead completely and entirely full. End.